I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, there will be no post-game dancing on Bourbon Street after the Saints' victory this Sunday, partially because there will have been no fans in the Dome to do the dancing. Week 1 of the NFL season begins with the city still in Phase 2, while Jefferson Parish celebrates Phase 3. We will look tonight at the phases and at the future of pro sports and its fans. We'll also look at politics, where Congressman Cedric Richmond's future may be linked to Joe Biden, and at transportation, where the good news is that the ferry service may be expanded soon. But the bad news is that the virus has created a declining use for streetcars. Those stories are in the lineup for tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Jessica Williams, reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Jeff Duncan, sports reporter for the Athletic website. And Tyler Bridges, reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Go over to Errol first for the latest on phases and COVID numbers and the status. How are we looking?
Well, yesterday the governor made his big announcement. He'd been hinting for about a week or so that there was a good chance that Louisiana would go to Phase 3. And usually, I think we all know how this plays out well enough now. You know, if the governor hints that something might happen, usually it happens, but at the same time we say, yeah, but we know New Orleans won't do the same, and that also happened also. And so for the rest of the state, that they'll be moving from Phase 2 to Phase 3. There's a whole bunch of rules what that means, but roughly things like movie theaters and auditoriums and museums can go up their capacity to 75%, which is up to 1,000 people. Restaurants can go up to their capacity. And so mostly it's a capacity increase along the lines. But today, this afternoon, he wanted to embellish and go into some more details about Phase 3. And he really spent a lot of time talking about bar rooms, which I think has been a sensitive subject because bars have been hit pretty hard during all this. And what he said, and I think there's a lot of bartenders, especially in New Orleans, who are hoping for better news, but what he said is that some bars will be able to reopen if they are in the parishes that have the lowest levels of incidence. And even though they have a whole group of restrictions in terms of the bar service, that at least there's a first step towards going back to the bar rooms. He also talked about nursing homes. There's a real sensitivity to have a little bit more flexibility in terms of families being able to see people in nursing homes. And so he set up some guidelines for that also. And so they're working in those directions. It's more just like fixing up things, but for now it stays the same. And so we'll be in Phase 3 for a while. No telling how long New Orleans is going to be in Phase 2, because as the mayor emphasized, one thing that really has her concern is schools. That with the schools opening, that she didn't all of a sudden want to allow Phase 3 with all of this transaction happening. And so staying at that affects it, but it also affects the city in many other ways, as we can see, like with football season and high school preps in a lot of different ways.
You know, with the bars, he did say that there would still have to be table service. People would not be standing up around bars. And this is across the rest of the state. Doesn't apply to Orleans right now. But one thing that really, sort of stood out to me in listening to the governor's press conference this afternoon, still no live music. The musicians in this community are just really, really taking a hit. Still no live music for them.
And that was a real letdown because, especially in New Orleans, I mean, bars and live music are so much a part of the spirit and the mood of Lakeview, of that. I think musicians are becoming Zoom experts now because you're having a lot of virtual things, virtual concerts. But you know what? The first few virtual concerts were fun, but it's not the same thing as being in there, like being in the bar place and having like a real drink in front of you as opposed to a virtual drink. And so I think people are getting anxious for the real thing.
Right, and also being able to jump up to the dance floor and move to that wonderful music that the musicians are playing. So, all right, so rest of the state in Phase 3 with some limitations. Orleans Parish still on Phase 2 with a close eye on the numbers. All right, Eve, thanks a lot. Jessica, let's go over to you because there's an issue now, of course, of affordable housing, which is a broad-based issue and a lot of concern about that. The city has a plan before it for one section of town. Can you describe that?
Sure. So for quite some time, the Housing Authority of New Orleans, HANO, has been moving to redevelop its vacant parcels of land that it's long owned in neighborhoods that in some cases look a lot different than they looked pre-Hurricane Katrina. These are neighborhoods that within the last 15 or so years have gotten increasingly more expensive for people to afford, and have had seen an influx of new residents come into the area who can afford the higher prices. These are residents of different social and economic backgrounds and different races in a lot of cases than the residents who were there before. And now Hano is moving to redevelop its land that it owns. And the neighbors who are there now have some opinions about it. They want to make sure that the houses that are being built on the sites, which are now vacant, match with the architecture of the surrounding homes. They want to make sure that the layout in the design will be safe for the people who are living there. And these concerns have played out at city council meetings and at city planning commission meetings. And these residents have sought to stop or delay the developments, and in some cases have been accused by some affordable housing advocates as not being opposed to the site design, but to having lower income residents as neighbors. And so there have been these, racial and class tensions around the development of these parcels of land. And ultimately, one of that came to a head this week or recently when the City Planning Commission approved Hano's request to redivide some lots in the Leonidas area, and specifically some addresses around General Ogden, Rousseau, Willow, and Monticello Avenue streets. And this was something that the Planning Commission was really the last stop, for this project to be, get the approvals that it needed to go forward. If the Planning Commission's decision is appealed, the City Council could hear it. But the City Council had a committee meeting, I want to say about a week ago, where they expressed support for the project. And the mayor has also expressed her support for the project. And so some of the residents are feeling pretty disappointed that they didn't get to see some of the changes that they wanted to see in the design, while others are cheering this as a real progress and a real step forward to the city's broader plan of putting more affordable housing on the street.
How many units are we talking about?
We're looking at about 20. So for the Leonidas area in particular, and this is just one piece of a broader plan that Hano has to redevelop about, I want to say, 117 parcels of land, both in Leonidas, in the Lower Garden District, in the east side, the East Riverside and the West Riverside neighborhoods, really these Mississippi River adjacent neighborhoods that are on higher ground where Hano has owned this land for quite some time.
And so you're talking about also concerns for the design. The residents there right now are concerned about the design. And one thing that I read that kind of stood out to me was, as it's designed, there is no back door. And residents feel, the residents there now, those opposing it, saying that's probably not going to be too safe. I mean, what's the response from the developers and the cities about that?
So the neighbors have said, repeatedly that they think that the duplex units, so not all of the units, because Hano's also doing some home ownership opportunities and some single family homes as well, for a total of about 117. But the duplex units do not have a second exit, and they are saying that that's a safety concern. The developer has responded by saying that they're not required to provide all of the things, including the back exit, that the neighbors would want, but that they have made other concessions, such as including more green space on the property, having balconies to be included in the design at the request of some neighbors, and making other aesthetic changes to really help the duplexes fit better with the other houses that are in the area.
Does this create greater density than perhaps what the zoning code would allow?
It does not. So the only thing that they needed to do at the City Planning Commission level was to get the 20 pieces of land redivided so that they could place the duplexes upon it. But in terms of whether there are any other zoning regulations that need to be changed, it would be a by right development there. And it would not be a special use that the City Council would have to approve. And so that's also the developer's defense. We are trying to meet, the city's zoning regulations and work within that, and trying to work with the neighbors at the same time. But as we continue to tweak the design, that is an added cost associated with it. And we are also offering, these units at very low rents. And so we don't want to increase our costs while we won't be able to recoup it through rent.
So it goes to council next?
So
it's ready to go to council now?
The council will not consider it unless there is a formal appeal of the City Planning Commission decision. The last thing that we reported on this was, I believe, on Tuesday. I have not heard that appeal has been filed, but I can imagine that some neighbors are upset about that decision. and may push it on to the council.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Jessica. Okay, Jeff, over to you. The Saints, finally, we're going to get a chance to see him play.
Yeah, big anticipated home opener, Marcia, this Sunday against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I can't remember a game that's had this much anticipation about it. Every year Saints fans get excited, but the fact that we haven't had any preseason, this unprecedented offseason with the pandemic, and I think couple all that with the expectations that this team could make another Super Bowl run. The Saints right now, one of the favorites to make it to the Super Bowl down in Tampa. I think all those things have added up to just great hype and buzz around this game on Sunday. You not only get the start of the season, but you get it against a division rival, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who just happened to be quarterbacked by Tom Brady, maybe the greatest quarterback in NFL history, coming into town for his first game. And I think there's a lot of intrigue and excitement around that. And the fact that this game is being broadcast in the prime spot on Fox Sports. It's the national broadcast game at 3:25 p.m. It's going to be broadcast over 90% of American homes. So, it should be a great stage. It's going to be really interesting. We were talking before we went on air about what it's going to be like in the Superdome with no fans. There's going to obviously be a lot of COVID restrictions at this game. So I'm interested to see what it's going to be like on Sunday in the Superdome for this big opener.
Jeff, I think what a lot of people are interested in is the Brady versus Breeze. And I'm curious about your declaring Brady to be maybe the best in NFL history. Where does that leave Drew Brees? How do they compare?
Well, that's a good question, Errol. I would argue that Drew Brees is certainly as great a quarterback as anybody that's ever played this game. Unfortunately, he has not won as many Super Bowl titles, and that's how quarterbacks and coaches are judged in this league. Tom Brady has, multiple five Super Bowl rings, and unfortunately, Drew Brees and Sean Payton have fallen short the last few years with teams good enough to make it to the Super Bowl. And I think that
and
ultimately
with bad calls
is the
from
line.
referees.
Exactly. Certainly didn't get any help there a couple of years ago, but they've got to get back. That's part of the Drew Brees, Sean Payton legacy this season. They know it's on the line this year, that they need to at least get back to the big game. Last year was so disappointing with how it ended at home against the Minnesota Vikings. The Saints were 9-point favorites and really just kind of laid an egg. And I think the way the last three seasons have ended has left a sour taste in everyone's mouth. And I'm sure it's served as motivation for this team. And look, they've handled the coronavirus very well. They've only had one positive test throughout training camp. Dwayne Washington, a running back who's said to be fine, and he's a reserve player on this team. The little mini bubble that the Saints put in place at the downtown hotel, the Lowe's Hotel, has worked. It's been very successful. They've had about 80 players, coaches, and staff members staying there full time. I think they're going to end up carrying that over at least early into the season. So that has been a positive for the New Orleans Saints. They have a couple injuries to worry about early on with Marcus Davenport and their rookie number one pick, Cesar Ruiz, who probably are not going to play on Sunday. But this team is loaded, you all. I mean, this is, on paper, the best Saints team, I think, in franchise history. It's not just that they have so many returning Pro Bowl players, but they have elite players in their primes of their careers. Other than Drew Brees, who obviously is in his 40s, every other player from Marshawn Lattimore to Alvin Kamara to Mike Thomas to Cam Jordan, Ryan Ramczyk, they're all in their 20s and just in the prime of their careers at the elite positions in the NFL game.
Well, we're excited about seeing them. It's a shame that they won't have, fans there with them in the dome, but we'll be watching, that's for sure. We'll be able to see them on TV. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Yeah, I think that'll satisfy a little bit of the fans just to be able to watch the football games, even if they can't be there early on.
Right, and to see this great team in action. And we certainly wish them all the best and want them to come out with a victory. All right, thanks a lot, Jeff. Tyler, over to you. Talking about victory, Cedric Richmond, our congressman, is very close to Joe Biden and is certainly hoping for a victory there.
Yeah, Cedric Richmond is the congressman from New Orleans. His district also goes up the river, up to Baton Rouge. And he's not been a guy with a particularly high profile in New Orleans, but he is a big deal in Washington. And he'll be even bigger deal if Joe Biden is elected president. When I interviewed Congressman Richmond, he made the point to me that he was actually part of a small circle with the former vice president from the beginning of his campaign. And he's really been one of the small group of advisors throughout the campaign. And as James Carville told me, that the coin of the realm in Washington, D.C. is if you're not a committee chairman, it's your access to the president. And so if Joe Biden does win, Cedric Richmond will be a very powerful member of Congress.
How involved is the congressman in the vice president's campaign? Is he advising him, like doing debate rehearsals, stuff like that?
He told me it's everything. He's on a daily conference call with the inner circle of advisors to the vice president. He's done debate prep. He'll look at TV ads, give just general advice. He made a point to me that early on he thought his voice was particularly important because at that point he was the only person in the inner circle who was an elected official and understood the how things are for the candidate. But again, he is the most powerful Louisianian, or at least the person from Louisiana who's closest to the former vice president at this point. And so that would be something really bearing watching if the vice president does win.
But Tyler, any muscle that he accumulates, at least in the House, would have to go through Nancy Pelosi. How is he with her?
I think he's pretty good with her. He's one of the assistant whips in the House Leadership Organization. It was very important that he chaired the Congressional Black Caucus for the first 2 years of the Trump administration and gained a national voice there. And also, I think one of the important things that he did during his tenure in Congress, he was elected in 2010, is remember the controversy involving Steve Scalise that came out in 2014, having spoken to an extremist group associated with David Duke. And there were even calls that Scalise should resign. Scalise, you remember, was saying that he didn't know that it was an extremist group, that he thought it was a local neighborhood group. Well, Cedric Richmond stepped up and went across racial lines, went across partisan lines, and said that he didn't think that Steve Scalise had a racist bone in his body. So now we're seeing that Congressman Richmond, who's gained a lot of power through his role with the Congressional Black Caucus, could even have an important role. One thing I should mention is that he told me if Joe Biden does win, he does not envision him, say, taking some job in the White House, that he wants to remain in Congress and would try to bring back more projects for Louisiana.
You know, we've had a history of members of Congress who got really, really close to power, and then something happened. Hale Boggs, for example, was next in line to be Speaker of the House, and then he was in that tragic plane crash. Robert Livingston was in line to be Speaker of the House, and then he had this scandal that was involved in. And so we've had people that have come close. We haven't had that many that have taken the next big step.
Yeah, and of course, Russell Long is a guy who was a power in the Senate for a long time. But Cedric Richmond's only 46 years old, and my guess is that Congressman Richmond is playing the long game and plans to be in Congress for a long time, build up even more seniority, and be a real power both within the House, but also in the Democratic Party.
And Congress doesn't have term limitations, at least in the House, whereas if you're a presidential appointee, you're around as long as the president is. That's going to be no more than 8 years max, so.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that was part of Congressman Richmond's calculation when he told me that if Joe Biden does win, he would stay in the House. He's running for re-election this fall, but he doesn't have a real challenger and hasn't had one since his election in 2010. All
right, Tyler, thanks a lot. We're going to move back over to Jessica right now for an update about streetcar ridership. It's been really down with this COVID-19 pandemic lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, ever since the pandemic triggered the restrictions on businesses and, on pretty much our entire way of life back in early March, the streetcars, they've seen a 90% decline in normal ridership. And anyone who's ridden the streetcar or tried to get a streetcar around times of major events in the city can attest to the fact that they are often just packed with tourists, people who are exploring the city for the first time and who want a ride on, these iconic vehicles. But we haven't had many tourists recently. So the St. Charles streetcar line and even some of the canal lines, particularly since the Hard Rock collapse, just have not been seeing the type of service or passengers to justify the service. And so the RTA at a meeting recently announced that it is actually considering plans to run the streetcars less often. I think right now the entire system is on a schedule that's typically used on Saturdays, just again, because across the system they've seen fewer ridership, but they would actually reduce that schedule even further. Streetcars could run, now it's like every 8 minutes that they run. They could run every 15 or longer. And the RTA is really looking at a series of ways in which it could cut service to try to save some money.
Okay, and then the ferries. We might have a couple of more ferries coming on board soon.
We could, and if anyone that has been watching this over the last really 2 years or 3 years now, it's been a saga with the ferries. We had 2 new boats that we were going to have on the water that we were promised, and then there was an issue with the shipbuilder. The shipbuilder delivered boats that could not pass inspection, and so we were stuck with our older boats, which in some cases are decades old, and have had serious mechanical issues that have had to be repaired. The RTA cut its ties with its previous ship manager and brought in a new firm that has put some boats on the water that have been getting people back and forth. But we finally had the RTA say that it is looking at September 18th to be able to bring at least one of the new boats back in service. And at that point, the second boat, there was 2 of them, the second boat would go back to the shipbuilder for a final, repair, a final overview, and then we would get that boat back at some point in the near future after September 18th.
Okay. All righty. Thanks a lot, Jessica. Jeff, over to you. The future of professional sports, the pandemic has really changed a lot. Obviously, no fans in the stadium or far less. So how is this going to impact professional sports?
Well, Marcia, I think there's reason to be encouraged overall. I think the future of sports is going to be different, certainly the near future, for the foreseeable future. Dr. Anthony Fauci announced today that he doesn't think we'll get back to any sort of normalcy in this country until maybe the end of 2021. And I think that's probably going to be the case for sports as well. For instance, this weekend, the Saints game in the Superdome, not only will there not be any fans there, but there's not going to be a lot of the normal, sideline participation from cheerleaders, for instance. There's going to be a lot of restrictions on the media covering the game. I think they've got room for 66 seats in the press box. They normally would have well around 200 or so seats there. I know Mark Romig is going to call the game this weekend, the PA announcer, which I think is interesting since there's going to be no public in the stands. He's still going to call the game. But they're going to have a taped color guard presentation on video board, as well as the national anthem, trying to restrict the number of people that are actually in the dome to lessen the chance of any kind of infections. I think we're going to see these kind of implementations carry on probably throughout this season of all the different sports and maybe well into 2021.
And as far as the Saints are concerned, the game on the 27th also, the city says no fans in there. September 27th.
Right. And that's exactly right. And LSU has been given the go-ahead to have fans, 25% capacity at Tiger Stadium. So their first game against Mississippi State, that same weekend that the Saints will not have fans in the Superdome against Green Bay Packers in week 3, LSU will have 26,000 or so fans for their game. And the Saints, it's going to be really interesting, Marcia, because they're not going to play in front of fans in their second game of the season in Las Vegas. Las Vegas is not going to have fans all season long at any of those games, the Raiders' home games. And then in week 4, the Saints go on the road to Detroit, and they are not going to have fans for any of their games, at least the first month of the season. So the Saints will probably play their first 4 games of this year without any fans. It might be till week 5 when they come back here to New Orleans and play against the Los Angeles Chargers on Monday Night Football in October before they actually have fans in the stands.
So will there just be silence in the stadiums, or will crowd noise be piped in?
Yes, crowd noise is going to be piped in. The NFL is going to have an audio engineer at every NFL stadium that's going to use ambient crowd noise to prevent it from being just completely silent. But they can only go up to 75 decibels, so they're not going to have that deafening din like we're used to in the Superdome. That home field advantage that the Saints are used to having with the home crowd here, the passionate fans that they have, is going to be out the window, at least for their first 2 home games. And that's something that Sean Payton and the coaching staff and players are trying to find a way around. Maybe they create their own energy there, but I think it's going to be, at least early on, a significant disadvantage for the Saints not having the home crowd.
Jeff, I'm wondering.
But it'll be I was going to say, but it'll be an advantage for them when they're on the road, right?
Exactly. And I think the concern they have, of course, is just that it's such a significant advantage for the Saints here because of the home crowd, because of the dome and the acoustics in there, that it really creates problems for the opposing quarterback,
right.
Especially this weekend. Tom Brady, a guy who likes to get to the line of scrimmage, look over the defense and change the play at the line of scrimmage with an audible. He usually can't do that with that crowd noise. He's going to be able to do it this weekend.
Okay, and also no tailgating on public property in New Orleans, nothing around the Dome, so that can't happen either. Just a real difference in Saints fans' energy. We'll have to just spend it all at home, or there will be places where you can go watch the games, some businesses and bars and restaurants, stuff like that. Okay, other stories. Errol, over to you.
Wednesday, the board of the Downtown Development District voted to allow $5 million over 2 years to go to the city for drainage improvements downtown. And so the DDD is kicking in to try to help prevent flooding downtown.
Tyler?
Yeah, I wanted to mention the census. Just encourage anybody who has not signed up for the census to please do so. It benefits all of us because it directs more federal dollars over the next decade to Louisiana if the more people in the state who sign up.
It's important. All right, Tyler, thanks. Jessica, over to you.
You can add the city of New Orleans to the long list of people who have sued the owners of the Hard Rock Hotel. The city of New Orleans finally sued to recoup some of the losses that it's incurred as the building has sat in that state for now almost a year.
Almost a year next month. Thanks a lot, Jessica. Jeff, to you.
Yeah, I spent Wednesday morning, about 6 hours on Wednesday down in Lake Charles, reporting on some of the after effects of the devastation of Hurricane Laura, and it was shocking to me how much devastation there is. I'd really encourage everyone out there, if they can try to help McNeese State University in particular, you can go online, mcneesefoundation.org/give. They really need it. It's shocking just how bad everything is. I think a lot of people think that they kind of dodged a bullet down there, but they didn't. Anything but. It's pretty stunning.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Jeff. And also, if you are in the WYES viewing area, you can now watch WYES's live broadcast. That's our everyday schedule on the WYES app and also on the PBS video app. We're just now streaming all of our programming, local programming, and also PBS programming. Thanks, guys. I want to thank our panel, everybody from your respective locations. Thank you all for watching us. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.